Welcome to the Jaco Report. I'm Charles Jaco. Saying the St. Louis City Police Department has a racism problem is sort of like saying the Mississippi River is wet. It's accurate as far as it goes, it just doesn't go nearly far enough. And that's why black officers founded the Ethical Society of Police back in 1972 to bring attention to and fight endemic racism within both the department and the larger St. Louis community. The Ethical Society expanded to the county police department last year. The president of the Ethical Society of Police, Detective Sergeant Heather Taylor, has been active trying to recruit new minority officers for the city police department. She's been verbally attacked by fellow white officers and was threatened with discipline back in 2016 for talking to a reporter. Detective Sergeant Taylor joins us today to talk about policing, racism, and the department in general, and her hopes for a more diverse police force. Welcome to the Jaco Report. Thank you very much for coming in. Now, you've been a cop for how long?
9/11 of this year will be 19 years.
And you decided to become a police officer. Why?
Because I have a cousin who was a St. Louis City police officer. I've always liked the idea of policing and, more importantly, helping people, specifically children who are victims of crime.
How hard is that message to get across to younger people in the black community today, especially in the city of St. Louis, where the default position is not to trust the police department at all? I mean, how do you convince them that, hey, this can be, you know, an honorable, decent profession when they see charge after charge after charge of the police department acting in a racist manner?
Just setting the example. I think I'm an example of who they are. I came from the inner city, went to Vashon High School, grew up in North St. Louis. I have a relative who was murdered by law enforcement. I have friends who are law enforcement who have been killed in the line of duty. Walking through those same neighborhoods at night, going to and from practice, going to school. I think it's all depends on the person who's sending the message to them and how you relate to them.
Now, in the time you've been a police officer, have things gotten better or worse in terms of racism within the city police department?
I think it's probably about the same. You know, I think
hasn't really changed that much.
No, when I first came on, I was kind of blind to it, very naive to certain things. And even I remember I had 2 years on the police department, and I had a colonel state to me that I wouldn't get a position because they had an African-American female already in the job. And
so we've got one of you, we don't need two of you.
Exactly. And so, you know, and at the time I was angry by it, but I didn't know what to do. You know, only representatives that I had at the time, I believe I was a member of Ethical and the Police Officers Association at the time, but I felt like I didn't have any outlet, that, you know, they wouldn't listen to Ethical, and that the POA would never represent me in that. And as a matter of fact, that commander filed a reverse discrimination lawsuit. So it's pretty ironic, you know. So.
Well, given the state of things in the St. Louis Police Department right now, do you have hopes for things getting better? Like you said, you guys within Ethical are trying to recruit minority members to be in the police department. You're going out and being very proactive. Yes. in that regard. Do you see that making any difference in the larger context? Because you've got a ton of white officers there who just don't like black people.
There are some. And, you know, the thing is that I think that we're making a difference. I know that we are. You know, we are, even if people who come to our pre-academy class, they don't graduate and they may not be recommended as police officers. That's the contact that they have with us. They get to see a different side of policing. They get to see these average people doing this job that are dedicated and motivated to do it, and to try to teach them the right way to do it.
Now explain that pre-academy.
It's the Ethical Society of Police pre-academy. It's a 10-week recruitment program in which anyone from our community can attend. You're taught you're taught classes in ethics, cultural diversity, public speaking. You're also taught community outreach, things like that, to try to connect with your community, the things that are going to be most important to you. You're going to have to know how to talk to people. Public speaking is going to be important. You're going to have to connect to your community, which means that you're going to have to go out there and do some community-involved events, whether on your own or with your police department or your division or in patrol, whatever it is. And right now, being ethical is a major problem in some sense with our police department. So that's what we want. We want those well-rounded officers that, or some of them are not all African American. Some of them are white females. Some of them are African American females, males, and white males as well. It's been pretty diverse, our recruitment program.
Now, I follow you on Twitter, and you had tweeted a few weeks ago some, really disturbing stuff about how this one officer with whom you occasionally have to work at crime scenes had made statements in the past of having, fantasies of seeing you lying in a puddle of blood and that sort of thing. That really disturbed me. That really disturbed me to think that one officer could talk about another officer that way just because of political or racial disagreements. And you closed it by saying, I'm not part of that thin blue line. I'm a black person, then I'm a cop. How does that dynamic play out? Is that kind of stuff common? Do you have to put up with that kind of stuff a fair amount, or is that the exception to the rule? And how does it expand to other black officers? How hard is it for them?
It's difficult at times, and I am very proud to be African American. I'm very proud to be a police officer. I'm proud of who I am. It's difficult from family standpoint. My husband, no one, from his standpoint should ever talk to me that way. And it's angering for him, more angering for him than it is for me. And when you talk about other officers, other black officers are angry, livid, that someone could like the idea that I work with, that I'm supposed to protect and serve with, that likes the idea of me bleeding out, dying, or that can call me the B word and still remain in this job. Because when I go out on a scene, wherever I go, I have to remain professional. There's a target on my back, and I know that. And I'm supposed to be this example for our community of what an officer is supposed to be, and it's difficult. But I do understand that there's a bigger picture. There are more kids, little girls that are African American, little boys that are African American in these communities that have been mistreated by police officers that I have to stand up for, and the ones internally that I have to stand up for too. And you keep it moving.
Now, when you say you go out on a scene and you've got a target on your back, you're not referring to the bad guys gunning for you, are you? You're referring to your fellow officers?
At times, yes. At times, yes. And when you're vocal, that goes for any officer that's vocal on this department, that stands up to corruption, that stands up to racism. We have white members that do the same things, and it's difficult for anyone. So.
When the city took over the police department, did that make any difference at all in terms of the internal attitudes, or was it just, same stuff, different day?
No.
No difference at all?
It's a lot of bureaucracy now, more so than what it was before. Little things are very difficult at times to get accomplished that are a necessity. So it's, you're talking about adding a perspective with just having us under state control versus city control. And we're right there next to the people that make the decisions about our police department.
How hard is it to maintain as a black cop when you have examples like the 4 federal indictments? I mean, these guys are indicted for covering up brutality, and the brutality was against a black undercover cop that they beat senseless and still hasn't been able to come back to work. And I would imagine every African American officer on the police force thought, there but for the grace of God goes me. I mean, how hard is it to maintain a strain of professionalism when you know there is a certain cadre within the white ranks of the St. Louis Police Department that doesn't want you there at all, or even worse, and doesn't think much about the black folks they're supposed to be serving and protecting?
You have to stand strong, because without us being here, it would be much worse. And that's what you have to relay to people you're trying to recruit.
Without black officers.
Black officers, minorities in general being here. You'd have to deal with a lot more without us. And so it's important for us to stand strong, to be verbal. That goes for our Bosnian officers as well. We're lacking there. We're lacking in Hispanic officers. We have Hispanic members as well. And it's difficult at times, you know, when you have officers who are talking about building a wall and laughing about it, when you have Hispanic officers who have families that live in Honduras and that are outstanding people and citizens. And then you have your own coworker that wants your family to be deported, that is for laws that are discriminatory. So it's difficult, but I think our members do a great job of standing strong, holding our ground, and fighting for what we have to fight for.
Okay, as a black cop, your perspective on the idea that the St. Louis Police Department, because of the racism involved in it and because of all the scandals, may not be capable as a professional law enforcement agency of controlling crime in this city. In other words, that the high crime rate in parts of St. Louis may not be so much a result of, you know, guns, poverty, and dysfunction as it is a racist police department being unable or unwilling to do its job.
I'm going to have to agree with you to a point, but disagree. A lot of the systemic factors, that's a legislative issue, because we have to have legislators that understand the issues that African Americans, Hispanics, that poor people in general face. And as you can see, our legislators, they don't understand it. There are also issues, you're going to have pockets of racism. There is definitely racism within our police department, but there's also a disconnect between our legislators with people who are poor, our unhoused community. Those, when we're out on Thursday nights helping Mama Cat and the pot bangers feed people, we see black, we see white, we see a number of people with mental illness issues, and those issues are systemic. Yes, they are. However, the people who have the most direct effect of changing that are your legislators, and they have to do a better job of that. Police officers, there's no way in this world that we should actually think that an officer has the skills, the mental health skills to help anyone in our community like that. We're not social workers, and we haven't done a good job of putting social workers in our police department to help us reach those people that we need to connect with, then to internally and then externally connect them with resources that are most critical for their survival. Because we're officers, we're here to enforce the laws to a point, but we can't expect us to bear the brunt of the problems within society and the disconnect.
Have you observed anything like the so-called pullback that's been written about in the Baltimore Police Department, where the officers, after the Freddie Gray verdict, just stopped enforcing the law in a lot of communities and said, if these people are going to kill each other, have at it, we're not going to do a thing about it. In some sections of St. Louis, obviously, violent crime has spiked, in others it has not. I mean, have you seen any evidence that there's been that kind of pullback among white St. Louis officers saying, you know, especially after the Michael Brown uprisings, that, well, if we're going to get this kind of grief, we're just going to pull back and not do our jobs?
And if I see it, I will report them. And I haven't been privy to that, because I think it's absolutely nonsense. You know, you have a community that has to have protections, that has to be served properly. And if I had any, I wouldn't doubt that it's happening. I can't say that it's not happening, but I haven't run into anyone, and my interactions are limited because I'm in homicide. There is no way for my guys who were assigned to me to not do their jobs. So,
what is the single biggest problem, do you think, right now within the city police department from your point of view?
I think the single biggest. There are so many.
I know there are a number of them. Is there any one that pops up above the others?
I think we have an issue with the culture that believes that we're sometimes above the law. I think that's an issue, and that's an issue across the country. You also have an issue with the disconnect between black officers and white officers. There is a divide there, but there's a divide everywhere in society. You know, most people are going to be geared towards people who are most like them, and there is also the disconnect with how we interact with people in our community. We haven't done a good job of explaining to officers and showing them that it's okay for someone to be different than you. And if you have a problem with it, you need to be terminated.
Well, you'd figure in 2019 people would kind of absorb that issue almost normally now rather than having to be lectured about it.
Well, we have a president so that demonstrates so many wrong ways of how to interact. So, you know, he was elected by the people. So people believe in what some of the rhetoric that he presents. So it's not, you know, to expect officers who probably have voted for him as well to suddenly behave humane and treat people fairly and say the right things at the right times when people need to hear it.
The Ethical Society is an organization, but it's not the official union-recognized bargaining unit. That's the St. Louis Police Officers Association. The SLPOA, especially through its business manager, Jeff Rorda, has been accused of systemic racism just over and over and over in instances almost too numerous to mention. Does the Ethical Society have a decent working relationship with the St. Louis Police Officers Association, or does the racist reputation of that organization get in the way of their being the organization that's supposed to represent you guys as well in union bargaining sessions?
If it's an issue that's a collective bargaining issue, our members, if they contact us, we're going to always be involved in the process, even with them being the sole bargaining agent. If it's something that's grievable per that collective bargaining agreement, there is a contact where they contact us or we reach out to them if it's a mutual member. So if it's an Ethical Society member, that can be a member of all three organizations. We have a sergeant and a above organization leadership. We have the POA. And we have ethical. So we have members that are members of all three. And if it's a labor-related issue involving that collective bargaining agreement, we reach out directly on behalf of our member to make sure they're treated right. Because it's important, because the POA has never stood up for issues that have been about race and about our organization about equality when it comes to that along racial lines. And they know that these things exist and they haven't done much about it. So.
For the average, I mean, as working cops, I would imagine that, like in your unit in homicide, you have to get along to get the job done. But you had said earlier that things really haven't changed terribly, terribly much in the 19 years you've been a police officer. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's the endemic racism that exists within society as a whole, or do you think it's specific to St. Louis?
I think it's society as a whole. I think the one thing that hasn't changed are the disconnects, the conflicts that are there, along racial lines, that are along beliefs about, you know, how to handle officer misconduct. I think now the culture is that in our police department, which I think is a good thing. If you do something wrong, there's a high probability that our chief is going to seek to terminate you if it warrants termination, and I think that's important. But along racial lines, I think things are the same. You know, they haven't really changed there. The one new dynamic is that we have a police chief that's willing to prosecute you if he has to, if you violate the law, and push forward for better there.
Final question. There have been a lot of corruption and misconduct allegations within the St. Louis Police Department recently. You had the 4 cops indicted by the feds, 2 cops arrested for shooting a guy outside of a bar, the so-called Russian roulette case. You've had a number of other cases like that. Has this kind of stuff gone on for a long time and people are just now getting caught for it? Or is this a recent phenomenon where suddenly bad behavior is boiled up? And what's that say to you as a police officer about your fellow officers?
I think it's something that's been going on for a while. It's been a culture. And when you have
within the police department.
Yes, absolutely. And it's now that you have people in positions, and I give the credit more so to the chief than the public safety director, that's for sure. And it's been a culture that's there. And now you don't have someone from the POA that's directly connected with the internal affairs division commander to make a call and to get a pre-call about an officer that's done something where he or she needs to be fired. No matter if they're black, white, whoever, you got to go, you got to go. If you're doing something that's bringing discredit to our police department, our community, and it's illegal. So there's a culture that has existed, and we still have a lot of those people that are here in high-ranking positions that allowed this mess to occur. And ultimately, the chief, the public safety director, the mayor, they're going to be held accountable for why these people are still here. And it's time out for us to change. I know we wrote a report in 2016 that outlined all of this. And here we are. 3 years later, everything we said was a problem is now being shown as a problem. And ultimately, they're going to have to get rid of some of these high-ranking commanders that have condoned this behavior. So.
Heather Taylor, thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Our thanks to Detective Sergeant Heather Taylor of the Ethical Society of Police, and our thanks to you for joining us. We'll see you back here next week for another edition of the Jaco Report. Thanks for being with us.